Everybody, welcome back to the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ. Now, we've got, I say this every week, we got a real special guest. Now, the guy, I already gave half of it away. The guy we have on our guest as a guest today is the one and only Ryan Cochran. Now, if you're a hot rodder or if you're into hot rods, if you've been online in the past 20 years, you will know Ryan Cochran through his jalopyjournal.com and his message board called the H.A.M.B, which is H.A.M.B, which stands for Hokey Ass Message Board. And we are about to get into with Ryan. A lot of people who are H.A.M.B fans and H.A.M.B members don't know who Ryan wouldn't know Ryan if you walked up and smacked him in the head. They've never heard his voice, they've never seen his face, and he's done that by design. But we've got him, and he's an old friend, and we're really looking forward to this episode of the barbecue. The only thing, short of actually like cooking out some hot dogs with him in person is this is what we've got right now. And at some point in the future, we hope to do again in person. But in the meantime, get ready for Ryan. And we have, as always, we scour the zillions of pages of Hemmings classifieds on Hemmings.com to try to come up with a card that we find that represents the conversation you're about to take part in, or at least listen to. And in this case, Ryan is very specific about the cars he loves. He loves traditional hot rods. And if you don't know what a traditional hot rod is, stay tuned. In the meantime, I want to show you one. We actually found one on Hemmings.com. It's a 1940 Ford Deluxe Coupe for sale, and it's got the right white walls, it's got the right Flathead V8 engine in it, it's got the right speed goodies on that motor, it's got a set of Offenhauser aluminum heads, it's got the right stance, it's got a little bit of that rake that we love so much, so it's got the right color. It's Henry Ford black. I think it's black. Anyway, take a look at it. You're going to love this thing, and get ready for our conversation with the one and only Ryan Cochran from the H.A.M.B and the Jalopyjournal.com. We'll be back in a sec. All right, y'all. And I'm saying y'all because I'm going to be talking to a guy from Texas. So it sounds a little weird for Californians to say y'all, or East Coast transplants to California when we say y'all. But this week on the Hot Rod BBQ, we've got the one and only Ryan Cochran. Now, Ryan is the man behind the curtain when it comes to the Jalopy Journal and the H.A.M.B. And the H.A.M.B is H.A.M.B, and that stands for Hokey Ass Message Board. And Ryan was one of the earliest, as long as I could tell anyway, you're one of the oldest and longest running hot rod and custom car chat boards. I'm using the wrong words, but online communities I can think of. Would you say that's true, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, when we first started the Jalopy Journal, this is before the H.A.M.B, you couldn't even have images on the internet yet. So
right,
it was text.
Yeah, and the Jalopy Journal now, I mean, the H.A.M.B itself is this giant community. It's how, it's one of the ways I think a lot of people actually got introduced to hot rods and things like that. And you've been doing this for so long now that I think that if you don't have any sort of presence on the H.A.M.B or you're not on the Jalopy Journal, you actually really have a hard time actually connecting to the rest of this specific world. And Ryan, he's coming to us from Austin, Texas. And dude, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
This is great. This is great. So like I said earlier, I think a lot of people don't realize, what your background is. So I'd love to actually start there with you, because you and I go back a long way, but you go back even further than I do in I'll call it custom culture. I know we sort of shiver about that, but tell me first of all, like how you got to the idea of actually starting the Jalopy Journal in the first place, because you're a Midwesterner, I think, by trade, right?
Texan.
Originally?
I grew up in Midland, Texas.
Oh, you did grow up in Midland. Okay.
Far West Texas.
Okay.
And I come from a racing family. So my dad raced cars all through medical school and beyond. And so when I became of age, he got me racing go-karts. And then from go-karts to bigger cars. And I actually went to Europe, and I went to racing school there. And it was during all that I was actually in Paris at a cafe, and I saw what I know now to be a 34 coupe, but at the time I had no idea.
In Paris.
In Paris.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I was fascinated by it. And when I got home, I started researching it. And I was already building the 38, but it was going to be a drag car, just a race
Oh,
car,
wow.
not a street car at all. And I switched gears on that, but I didn't really know what a traditional car was. I just know what I liked, aesthetically.
What years was that? Like, when were you in Paris? When did you see that 34?
I'm gonna guess that was around 94,
Okay.
maybe 93,
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
So that was
Um,
right at the beginning of this. It's right at the beginning of what we consider like our scene,
it
right?
was probably 2 years prior to the Rod and Custom article with the shifters, which
Yeah.
is sort of
Okay.
everyone's, gauge point of when this started.
Right. That was a big mile marker.
Yeah. And
Right.
I mean, when I got into this stuff, I got a bunch of Don Montgomery books from Hastings because you didn't order anything online back then.
Right.
And I just started studying traditional cars, and I shifted gears trying to get my 38 to be more traditional than what it was. And not knowing what I was doing, I was at the time I was at University of Oklahoma, and I was taking an HTML class. And so for my semester project, I built the Jalopy Journal,
Oh,
which
wow. That was a school project.
yeah, my freshman year. And so, yeah, so I just, I built this website out of HTML. I was home for Christmas, and my mom came up with the name. I didn't even know what the word jalopy meant.
Is that right? Because
Yeah,
you had this racing background, right? Like you
yeah,
were racing.
pure
What,
high technology cars.
yeah, right.
And so then it just sort of like once that class ended, I kind of ignored the website for probably 3 or 4 months. And then, as I started working on my car, I started doing it more and more. And people started emailing me with tips and suggestions to my questions that I had. And then before too long, there was a bunch of people asking for a message board. And message boards at the time were hosted at a place called GeoCities. I don't know if you remember
Oh
that at
my
all.
God,
That was,
GeoCities.
yeah, that was the only message board platform, and I hated it. But I finally relented and I called it "Here's Your Hokey Ass Message Board," and the name stuck,
And that's
which
how it came to
sucks.
be.
Yeah, because I hate the name. So that, I mean, it totally sucks. But what are you gonna
It
do?
stuck though. Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
people identify themselves, by the ham now, right?
yeah. Especially back then, man. And, social media has changed a lot of it. But there was a period there for a while where, I mean, everything in the traditional world, there was nothing on print. There was, nothing else on the internet. It was all just Jalopy Journal and the ham.
Well, dude, and for a lot of people, I think for the Hemmings crowd too, like, what do you mean when you say a traditional car? Because I think that a lot of people might not even know what that means.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, even on the ham, have different definitions of what that is. To
Yeah,
me,
what's that to you?
it's a pre-65 hot rodder custom that's built to a specific period during that time period.
Okay.
So like you can have a late custom from 65 Riviera, which is built like some rich guy would have built it in 1965. Or you have a Model A coupe that's built like a kid coming home from World War II would build.
Right. Right.
Um, so and there's different technology concessions for, a lot of guys run T5 5 speeds to make them a little more drivable and things like that.
Mhm.
And for the most part, you can get around or away with some of that stuff on the ham, as long as aesthetically it keeps the look. And
Right. And back then, when you first built the ham and the Jalopy Journal and early mid 90s, when this stuff was really starting to bloom, this was still an underground culture, right? Like this
we were
stuff,
all
there's,
teenagers.
we were all, right. And I would say, and tell me if I'm wrong, the only way that most people connected with each other, because magazines are what they are, and it's great to actually get the magazines and have that as sort of like this, communal touchstone. But for what you were doing, it was really the only way for us kids, and we were in our teens and 20s, like you said at the time, this was the only way for us to connect, right? This is how we actually found out about each other, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. It's
Yeah.
those early days, especially because I mean, nobody really paid attention to us at all.
No, right, exactly.
Yeah,
And I talked to the guys in the, like you were mentioning, the Shifters car club out of Orange County in Southern California. Those guys, talk a lot about, and the other clubs at the time, like the Choppers and some of these other clubs,
yeah,
talked about going to swap meets and car shows, and they would just basically pick up almost for free these parts that the street rod scene was just casting off. Like, just take it. And Keith Wiesner, the artist who's in this scene pretty heavily, he would talk about, well, we'd bring home pickup truck loads of these parts and the magazines from the 50s and 60s, learn how to put these parts together for like $50.
Yeah.
Giving the stuff away. Is that kind of what you were experiencing at the same time too?
Yeah, and especially because I was in college in Oklahoma, and I mean, nobody in Oklahoma was doing traditional cars. So
right.
I mean, any of these early parts you could get for nothing.
For nothing. And then I've seen photos of you, old photos of you, like sort of in some ways, I don't want to say in the background, but you were there when like photographers like David Perry was documenting the scene back in the 90s and the late 90s and early 2000s. And I've seen you, like, you're in like the back seat of, I think it was like Rob Fortier's car and his Riviera, I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah,
and you were at the Paso shows, right?
That might be in one of David Perry's books, I think.
I think it is.
I mean, yeah. I was and still am a huge David Perry fanboy.
Yeah. And for people at home, David Perry was a photographer, and it's how I got into this scene too, in a lot of ways, who pretty much documented the mid 90s, early 90s, even in some cases, even late 80s, early 90s hot rod revival scene that Ryan basically helped develop. But I don't think any photographer even since then has really done better what he did back then. Right.
As far as like street photography,
yeah,
and traditional hot rods, David Perry sets the standard, no doubt.
Right, and still has. I've not seen anyone knock him off that post.
And I think he like sails the world in a sailboat or something now.
Is that right?
That's what I heard. I don't know if there's any truth to that. But it wouldn't.
That's very Hemingway. That's very Hemingway. That's sort of him, right?
Like a decade ago, I heard he bought a sailboat, and then like 5 years later, I heard he was sailing around the world, and I haven't heard anything about him in probably 5 years. Yeah.
Wow. I can picture there should be a song written about that, I think. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So back to the H.A.M.B. So you start the H.A.M.B. and this community starts to kind of grow around these cars, right? And what it's interesting to me that we were back then like embracing like 50-year-old, 40-year-old technology back then, and using what was at the time just cutting edge technology to do it, right? That sort of bloomed. Like walk us through what happened with the H.A.M.B. at some point. So you start growing this thing. Were you expecting it to grow like this? Did you have any idea what this might turn into?
No, and there was never a day where it was just like boom, it was huge. It just one of those things that like year after year after year, it just slowly and slowly built and grew.
Right.
But there was never that moment where I just took a step back and was like, whoa, what happened? You know what I mean? Like it just slowly, it was definitely not instant success. And I would say the first, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, there was no more than 200 people. Like it was.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty small.
Wow. And you were at the time where you were obviously coming to California too, right? To see these guys, and you became friends with a lot of the people who were really creating this scene of ours, right?
Rob Fortier basically put me in the middle of all that. So I met him at a show in Wichita, Kansas. And I was like, I think I was 18 at the time. And we were drinking, and he was like, that night he told me, I'm going to teach you what cool is. And I mean, he did. He taught me what cool was. So I stayed with him one summer in Orange. I was doing job interviews.
Wow.
And
what kind of jobs were you looking for?
At the time, I was trying to be a graphic designer.
Okay.
This was before graduate school, but after undergrad. And through him, I met like Skinny Jeff, Jimmy, Circle C Jimmy, and all those guys. And they were just recently out of the shifters. And so like I would go with them to different events in Southern California, but there was still like that high school friction between ex shifters and shifters. It was all very Yeah, it was all very fascinating to me, And then Dennis McPhail also was a big part of that too.
And for you guys listening at home, the people he's talking about, so he's talking about the Shifters Car Club, which is one of these like traditional hot rod clubs. And these guys were building cars that really defined what this scene was in a lot of ways. And not only were they building the cars, but they were living the lifestyle too. And these guys were, they were wearing like 50s era, wool car coats and cuff jeans. And it was a scene, man. I mean,
Very
hair
romantic.
grease. Yeah, very romantic. It was so cool. And Rob, member of the Sinners Motorcycle Club, and then I think is he a beatnik?
He was.
He was a beatnik,
Yeah.
and when you mentioned Dennis McPhail, he's a tattoo artist who's also in the Beatniks Car Club, and he's based in Kansas, I believe, still.
Yeah, Wichita.
In Wichita,
Wichita,
yeah. So you were actually hanging around like these guys who really were, and these people who were just defining this stuff. And to this day, we're still feeling the ripple effects of that stuff, right?
Yeah, and it's if you look back on it now, like Keith Wiesner, Cole Foster, Rob, like all these guys are just like, when they were that young, they were crazy talented, like crazy talented.
Right.
And I was just there recording it, but those guys, man, some of the stuff, Rob is a writer, Wiesner as an artist, and Cole Foster as a fabricator, just the stuff they were doing as young kids, it's better than what a lot of people are still doing today. I mean, they were good at what they did.
Yeah, we're still feeling the effects of that stuff that they do,
sure.
right? Yeah. So then with the H.A.M.B, and the Jalopy Journal, as that community starts growing, I mean, and I was involved early on. I mean, I jumped on it, and I forget how I found you. But I know you and I started talking, and then as that community grew, man, people actually started making friendships and started developing projects and cars. And I mean, the H.A.M.B was really the platform and the impetus for a lot of game-changing builders and cars and cultural events and shows, right? I mean, that's what the world looks like now, has a lot to do with what the H.A.M.B was even back then.
Yeah, it made a lot of like junior celebrities.
Yeah,
because guys in the middle of nowhere would like post their work and become known for it,
Right.
Like I can think of guys in my head where it's just like, I mean, they basically were junior celebrities because of it, weird.
And then you'd start going to car shows, and you would see H.A.M.B get together. You'd see a H.A.M.B banner flying, in one section of the show, and people would just flock to this stuff.
Yeah, and I actually still catch a lot of beef for that. I have super bad social anxiety, and so like I can't go to things like that.
Right.
Or I'd literally have an anxiety attack. But there will be shows where we'll have gatherings like that. They still do it, but it's pretty cool actually.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And this is sort of ironic that, I don't know if it's irony, but like that you just can't even attend this monster, this juggernaut that you created. Like, there's a reason why we don't see Ryan at these things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just by nature, I'm not much of a car show guy to begin with, just because crowds, and I mean, I'd much rather be driving a car than looking at one sitting still.
Yeah.
But then you add my little social anxiety issues, and it's tough.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I'm better now. Like when we do the H.A.M.B drags, I know all those guys, so I don't really have it. But if I go to California or a bigger show, or even the Roundup here in Austin, there's a lot of times where I start freaking out.
Yeah, well, and the Roundup, which is I think it's probably the greatest show, in the South there, in that Southwest area, that has become a huge undertaking, right? A big show.
Yeah, it's 2,000 cars.
That's crazy. So when did you move to Austin? Like, so you went to college, you went to California, you came back. When did you actually move to Austin?
So after school, I took my first job in Kansas City, and I worked in Kansas City for 4 years. And then from there I moved to Austin, which was 17 years ago.
Okay.
So wow. 16 or 17 years I've been here now. Yeah.
A long time. You're practically a native.
Yeah. Well, growing up in West Texas, then living here for so long. And we moved out in the country, and now where we moved is not the country anymore.
They all came to you.
Yeah, we feel like a founding family of Dripping Springs, Texas. So it's a little suburb we live in.
Which used to be the country.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So when you moved to Austin, and even 17 years ago, I mean, that's still in the thick of what I would say like this first wave of everything that we created, right?
Yeah.
What was happening in Austin at the time? I think there was the Austin Speed Shop, or at the time, I think it was called the South Austin Speed Shop.
It wasn't even around yet.
It wasn't around yet.
No. I came to Austin because Steve Wertheimer, one of the partners in the Roundup, a real close family friend of ours was like, "Hey, man, well, I was, I was starting and selling tech companies at the time, and
Mm.
he was like, "Man, tech scene's huge here. The car scene's way better in Austin than Kansas City. Why don't you do your next one here?"
There was motion at the front
And so
entrance.
eventually, I was just like, "Yeah, why don't I?" So we just loaded up and moved here, and yeah, we've been here ever since.
Yeah, you've really seen Austin just explode, because even
Yeah,
back then when you first moved here, it was still very, very much a tight-knit community, right? It was a small crowd.
yeah, and it's still that's the coolest thing about Austin is it's still really tight knit. Like there's a group of us, I don't know how many, but I would say less than 100, more than 50. And we come from all different walks of life. We have different political standpoints and different opinions and everything else, but we all get along. And even if we don't like each other, we pretend to. You know what I mean? Like there's no drama in Austin like there's in a lot of other car scenes. Everyone just is very cordial. It's a great play. The car scene here is second to none out of in friendliness. I'll say that, which makes it pretty awesome.
That's really
Um,
I've heard Frank Kozik, the artist, talk about, because he was in Austin back in the 70s. And he and I have talked about this every once in a while, and the phenomenon that is Austin. And he was saying, he's like, back in the 70s, it was just pickup trucks and Volkswagens. He goes, there was
yeah.
nobody, there wasn't a scene back then. And that just what do you think brought that scene or caused? I mean, I know you were part of it. I know Steve
No,
Wertheimer
I had
was.
nothing to do with it. It's two
No,
guys. It's Steve Wertheimer and Gary Howard. Those are the two
Gary
guys.
Howard.
Gary Howard built all Jimmy Vaughn's cars.
Okay.
And then Steve he's the guy that owns the Continental Club.
Hmm.
He's always been just sort of the ringleader of getting everyone together, getting everything organized, and making sure everybody has fun.
That
And
makes sense.
those are the two guys that really, really built the scene.
Okay. And
And
then
I mean, there's others obviously, but if I had to name two, that's who I would name.
they were the original seeds there in
Yeah,
Austin.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I remember too, like, wasn't there, I think there was a record label called Estrus, I think still around, and they created a box set of CDs, I guess, essentially.
Yes.
And they came in a model kit,
Von Franco
and,
did the art.
and Von Franco did the art. And weren't there a lot of Austin cars like on the art,
All of
on that box
Stevie's
art?
cars are on the cover. That art, I think, the inspiration photo they used. Steve Coonan shot in front of the Continental Club.
Yeah,
So that
right.
was a Rotters Journal shoot of like one of the first 2 or 3 issues of Rotters Journal that they turned into art for the cover.
Oh, is that how that came about?
Yeah,
Oh, interesting. Okay, because I was an East Coaster at the time, and I was kind of phoning it in on this stuff and just learning what this stuff was. And I didn't even know at the time. I didn't know what a traditional car was, and I certainly didn't understand. This is in the early mid '90s. I certainly didn't understand that you could actually own a hot rod that wasn't finished yet, or that concept of actually buying something, putting something together, then driving it and actually having fun with it before it was completely done to a 90 point, street rod show car. That made
yeah,
no sense to me. So watching that happen out there, and I think, watching, you know, projects like that Estrus, package and project come together, and learning about what you were doing on Jalopy Journal and the Ham, that was just the way in. Right. That was I think for a lot of us, we probably learned about this stuff through you guys.
yeah.
Yeah. And then there in Austin, where you were, and watching that kind of work being influenced by what was happening there in Austin, I think the very first car show, the Lone Star Roundup, that was 01 or 02?
I believe
02.
01.
Is that what it was at
I
the
think.
football stadium?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And it's grown. I mean, that was like, I was there at that first one, and I think it was maybe 100 cars, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I think the car count was 112
Is
total.
that what it was?
You know what's crazy too? And this is a testament to Steve Wertheimer. It's a 112 car show, and yet Reverend Horton Heat played the show.
He didn't. That's right. He did.
Remember, you,
That's
me,
right.
and Rob Fortier
Yep.
all went to Stubbs to watch the show, and Steve
That's
got us like side stage passes.
That's right. That's right. That was a big deal. I mean,
Yeah,
it's still a big deal.
yeah,
But to have a car which is basically 112 cars, that's just a big, that's a wedding.
Yeah.
That's what that is. Like, that's not, which actually happened at the show too. If
yeah.
you,
Right, right. Yeah.
it was a wedding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that scene, the scene that we kind of grew up in that way, at least in our car life and stuff. You know, I certainly will be the first one to admit that when I moved to California, like I was still trying to find my feet, and I was still trying to find my way through this stuff. I knew what I liked, and I knew that I had finally found a group of people that I identified with, and it made sense to me because I knew I wasn't a street rodder, and I knew I also wasn't, a back to the 50s doo-wop, quote unquote hot rodder guy that just had like, my fake, drive-in stuff hanging from the window of the cars with the fake milkshake and the burger. I'm not that guy
Yeah.
with the timeout doll, but I felt like I finally found my tribe with this stuff. But you never really, the cars you built were perfect, but you never really adopted the whole rockabilly look. Like you never did that part, right? Like that just wasn't your scene. You weren't going to do that part of it, even though you absolutely created a platform for all that stuff to really take a hold of sort of American popular culture, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So when I got out of college and I lived with Rob that summer doing job interviews, he took me to get my hair cut at like a rockabilly place, right? And they like gave me the pump and all that. And I got made fun of ruthlessly.
When you went back home?
Yes. I mean, to this day, Rob still gives me shit about that.
You're like, hey, soda pop.
Yeah. And I figured out, yeah, that's just not me, man.
Right. You just couldn't pull off the Dally boy.
Yeah, I couldn't do
right?
it. I
couldn't do
tried.
it.
I tried. I appreciated it. Yeah, I guess I'm too modern of a man to pull it off.
You are, man. That's what it is. Well, someone's got to do the digital stuff. Someone's got to do the high tech. Someone's got to do the ham. Someone's got to watch us.
Yeah.
I do, like talking about David Perry. When I first met him, I moved to California with a full-on menudo mullet and a pair of like lion tamer shorts and a pair of Reeboks. And he walked up to me and he handed me a tin of Murray's hair grease and a little black Ace rubber comb. And he goes, in that voice of his, he goes, "Hey man, figure it out." I'm like, oh God, okay. Figure it out. I'm like, all right, I'll do my best, man. I don't want to let you down.
That's hilarious.
Well, and now it's now 2021. We're obviously coming out of the pandemic, but I mean, where's the ham now? I mean, you've grown this thing to, I want to say, I know it's six figures at least when it comes to just membership, right? I mean, it is a force of its own now.
Yeah, I think it does about 25 million page views per month.
Wow.
Like about a year ago, I was looking at, because I used to have this real vendetta against the print industry, and that's one of the big reasons I stuck with it so long. But like a year ago, I was going over those numbers that I used to have of, Street Rodder magazine in its prime.
Yeah.
And I get about twice as many eyeballs per month than Street Rodder has ever gotten per year.
True testament, man.
Yeah. Which
it makes you happy.
It would, like, now it makes me sad because I'm like, they're all gone. Bummer.
It's all gone. Mm-hmm.
But if you would have told me that when I was a kid and I was pissed off at these guys, I would have been very happy.
Yeah, right. It's the perfect middle. It's the finger in the air, right?
Yeah,
like it's Like
and I have no idea why I was mad at them. I mean, it's not like I had a car that deserved to be in their magazine.
Right.
I just used it as fake motivation, I guess.
You got to be angry against something.
Yeah.
Right? Actually make something in the world. Some of the best stuff in the world was fueled by anger and frustration.
Well, and that's a big part of why traditional cars worked, right? Had this level of punk rock that you couldn't get at a Good Guys show or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it was just kids. We drove pretty fast. We were pretty gnarly, and there was just a punk rock, just something about it that just didn't feel legal almost.
Well, you make a good point too, because it wasn't like even the rockabilly revival and the rockabilly scene of the 90s and early 2000s, even late 80s. I mean, a lot of that was old punk rocker or ex-punk rockers, not even old, but ex-punk rockers, or people who had migrated from or graduated from or just moved or just embraced that scene. And there was a real sort of like one-to-one, easily adopted movement there when it came to the rockabilly scene, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and that influenced a lot of what was happening with the cars.
Oh yeah, the music and just, I mean, it. There was a period of about 5 years where it was this perfectly packaged lifestyle,
Yeah,
and
right.
it's since then I think it's kind of dispersed out a little bit where it's not because I we've all gotten older. But there was a golden period of like 5 years, and I doubt I could pinpoint the years because I'm not good at that sort of thing. But there was a good little period there where everything was packaged so neatly and nicely that it was hard to resist getting into this stuff.
Yeah. And like that's a great point too, and a great observation. I mean, do you think at that point was it could you just plug in and become a hot rodder overnight, or did you actually have to work at it and not be a poser?
Well, you could be a poser really easily,
Right.
and it still took time to gain the knowledge to do this stuff.
Right.
Um, but you could at least participate with very little effort. You could dress up and go to, I don't know, that show in Vegas or whatever, and not feel like an outcast. So I
Yeah.
think it was easily accessible. The barrier to entry was pretty low, and so
Mhm.
we were getting a lot of young kids. And once you get in, you got to have a car, right? And you can't buy one of these cars. You pretty much have to build it.
Right. Right.
So it was a good way to get people in. And I feel like, I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like we're not having as many young guys get into this anymore.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, what do you think? Because I know that when, like you said, in some ways I don't feel like an old guy. I mean, I'm not my dad's 50-year-old,
Yeah.
but at
Yeah.
the same time, like I'm still wearing the same sneakers I wore when I was 14.
Yeah, me too.
And I think we all are, right? But like, I think it's true that, I mean, does this stuff have, hey, now you're talking, oh, you sneaker pimp, you.
One of
Like,
my
what are those anyway? Were those
Jordan ones,
this
man.
your green Jordans? Oh
Since
man,
grade school, I've been a Jordan 1 freak.
look at that, dude.
Yeah.
See that? You're not doing like the Converse Taylors, and you're not doing the Vans. You're doing the Jordans.
I do Vans when I need something easy to put on, but yeah, my pimp shoes are Jordans. Only Jordan 1s, though. I don't go up at all.
Look, man, you got to be a purist.
Yeah.
That's the way this stuff works.
Traditional basketball shoes.
Look, it's all about tradition. There's a whole scene for that. I mean, you guys, I bet you have another chat board, message board, completely dedicated to traditional sneaker pimps, and we don't know about it.
I actually might.
See that? Yeah, you're not going to admit to it either, are you?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
knew it. But I think you're right too. That it's like as we get older, and now we have been doing this stuff for 20 plus years, and
Yeah.
where do the younger ones come from? I mean, where are we attracting our own 20-year-old versions of ourselves, or are we
I don't
not?
think we're doing a very good job of it.
Yeah,
If you
why
go
is
to,
that?
I don't know, like if you go to the Roundup, you go to my ham drags, you go to, any of the cool events, it's just us. There's not many younger than us. You'll see
Yeah.
someone in their 30s, but when like the first ham drags I did, half of us were in our early 20s, you know,
Wow.
and you'd have the occasional cool old guy, but for the most
Mhm.
part, we were all young. Even the first Roundup, I mean, we were all just young punks,
Right.
and you don't see that as much anymore. And I think it's because we're not doing a good enough job recruiting age. One of it's the cost. The barrier to entry has gotten really high.
It has, hasn't it? I mean, this stuff
Yeah.
has gotten expensive. What
Yes.
Wiesner's $50 truckload of stuff is now probably a factor of 3 or 4 of that now, I
Yeah,
would imagine, right?
easily. Yeah.
Yeah. I know I collect I mean, I've been putting speed parts together for the motor I'm building, and it's a 392 Hemi. Those Chrysler Hemis, I mean, those were junk back when they were first being built. You can't, I mean, just add a zero to
Yeah.
anything I buy for that thing. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
And
that 38 behind you, how's that? I mean, what would it take? What did it take for you to build your 38 when you built it? And what would it take now?
I know I had under 15,000 in it the first time I put it together, which was a lot back then.
Right.
And I have no idea what it cost to build it now. A
6
lot.
figures? Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And I would say like the heart, like the beating heart of the traditional scene, I would say, you could argue is a Ford Flathead, right?
Yeah.
And what does it take to
Absolutely.
actually build a Flathead Ford these days,
A
which is
good one's
vintage
20 grand.
technology?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A good one takes 20 grand.
Right. Right.
And
And
you
what
can piece together runners that'll be a pain in the ass to deal with, but I mean, a good, solid, reliable motor is 20 grand.
And for 20 grand, let's face it, for 20 grand, what kind of horsepower are you getting out of a flathead?
150.
Right. And now, or you could buy an LS crate
Mhm.
motor, and the aftermarket is just plug and play at this point,
Yeah.
right? You can
And
make 600 horsepower.
yeah, and another part of it too is being that we're focused on the traditional, there's nothing traditional about a 37 Chevrolet that you can pick up for cheap, right?
Right.
The traditional hot rod's a 32 Roadster, 29 Roadster, 33, 34 Coupe, 36, etc. And all that stuff is so expensive now that as a 17, 18-year-old, you're looking at it and it's just, it might as well be $10 million.
Right. Right. And so maybe that's part of it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think, I will say the old guys, because I don't, like I said, I don't feel like I'm there yet, but I hear the old guys complain about, well, it's all, it's kids on their phones. Well, I don't necessarily think that it's just phones. And I don't think it's
Yeah.
necessarily just a smartphone that's done this, that's not attracting, like, the younger crowd to our scene. Like you said, maybe we're not doing a good job of recruiting.
Yeah, I don't think we are. And I think those are the two things. One, we aren't recruiting at all. And two, it's just expensive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. Especially comparatively. So like we've got the barrier to entry of price, and then it's just like there's a lot of other things competing for attention if you're
Yeah.
25 years old, right?
The one thing in the last 5 or so years that I think has done a good job of recruiting is that Race of Gentlemen.
Oh yeah,
And
right.
it's such
Mel's
a
thing.
beautiful event. Um, and it's fun. And I think I can see young guys getting behind that. And it seems like there are some more young guys at those,
Mm-hmm.
but it
Mm-hmm.
certainly hasn't translated over into any of the other shows. It doesn't seem like.
Well, part of that now, test this out. I've always thought that Mel Stoltz and his Race of Gentlemen event, and for those of you at home, who are listening to this and don't know what this is a beach race full of cars that are for the most part pre 60s, in some cases pre 50s era, post-war style jalopies.
Yeah.
I mean, they're easy to build. The barrier to entry is probably fairly low, and
Yeah.
you're running an old car on the sand. Top speed on one of these drag races might be 40 miles an hour.
Yeah, maybe.
But it doesn't matter because the pageant around it, the scene of this thing, imagine like seeing old cars race on the beach for one. And this happens on the East Coast in Wildwood, New Jersey, on the beach down there, not the center of the hot rodding universe.
Yeah.
So for people seeing this stuff for the first time, it must just look like a spaceship race.
It looks like a movie set because
Yeah.
they force the drivers to dress appropriately. A lot of the people in the audience are dressed appropriately.
Right.
The first time I went, they told me to take photos. I had to be dressed up, and I was prepared to write an article that just blasted them, making fun of them. But by the time I left, if I saw somebody in like late model clothing, I was pissed. Like, dude, you're ruining the look. You know what I mean? Like,
that's awesome. Yeah,
it was
he did his job.
It was so beautiful. I mean, they're gorgeous. That is a labor of love that dude does. I
It
mean, all
really
the
is.
construction he has to. There's no way he makes money. No
No,
way.
I can't even imagine. And to your point too, I think what's so great about that is it's an event that is defined by the kinetic energy of it. Like there is not a car, like the cars that are sitting still are there because they're just not racing at the moment.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's energy there. You're watching something happen. It's not just a parking lot show where you just go and park your car and get out and set up your your beach chair and your timeout doll and wait for someone to come by and asking to borrow a Coors Light. That's not what this is.
No, these are purpose built, relatively cheap hot rods that guys are out there to destroy.
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Sink them in the sand up to the axles.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get it home. Maybe you'll
cover them in salt air.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's awesome.
That is amazing.
Really awesome. Yeah.
That is amazing. We was your first Race of Gentlemen when we met there at the truck stop on the way down there. Do you remember that?
Yes. I forgot about that. Yeah.
So for everyone listening, we were through Hemmings, we were sponsoring the Race of Gentlemen for the very first time. And we were caravanning down to Wildwood, New Jersey from our headquarters in Vermont. And we had our vintage Ford tow truck in tow. I think we had a Model A Roadster pickup that we brought along with us, and a whole crew. And we didn't really know what to expect, but we were going to go down there and do this, as sponsors and stuff. And on the way down to Wildwood, it just so happened that I personally, and I'm adopted, I had actually made contact with my birth father, and he actually happened to live in South Jersey. And we had agreed to meet at a truck stop. On the way, as we went down to Wildwood, he'd agreed to come out to that truck stop, meet me there, and we'd meet for the very first time. So we're having a cup of coffee in the little restaurant diner section of this truck stop, and I'm freaking out because I'm looking at my birth father for the very first time in my life, and my wife is sitting next to me, and she's just looking back like, does he have the same earlobes as the old man? Where does his eyeballs come from? Is there a history of heart disease here that I don't know about? I need to ask some questions. She's writing stuff down, and I hear this, "Hey man," and I look up, and there's Ryan standing there.
With my 4-year-old son. That was his first car show.
Yeah, that's right. And so I was a little nervous, and I probably wasn't acting like myself, and because I didn't know what to expect, because I'm just freaking out with all the feels, looking at my birth father for the very first time in the eye. There you are. And so we parted ways. You went on your way, and we met down there. We caught up a little later, and I think you had texted me, or I had texted you on the way down, or the next day when we were in Wildwood, and you had said something about, like, oh man, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, or something like that. And I said, no man, look, I was meeting my birth father for the very first time, and you texted back like, my timing sometimes is unfortunate, or something like that.
Yeah,
that was amazing. Crazy. Yeah, that was crazy. But what an amazing, and I think I said something even to the effect like, well, there's my life and my history all coming crashing together in the lobby of a truck stop in South Jersey. It was amazing. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And you and I've had some interesting, times over the years too, because my first magazine, Garage Magazine, you did the logo for that. You and I talked about early on, like in the late 90s, about that when I was getting that started. You were there at the very beginning.
I think David Perry introduced us from.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yep. I think that's true.
It was still, that was a good year or two, at least, before you started Garage.
It was. Yep. Yeah. It took me that long to figure it out. I had come from the advertising industry, and I knew the one thing I knew how to do was spend a lot of money. I figured that out, but I didn't know how to actually be an independent publisher yet. So I had to learn that the hard way. Yeah. So yeah, and that was part of the early success of Garage had everything to do with the H.A.M.B and the Jalopy Journal, because that's where I was finding the audience for this thing, and those people were rabidly loyal to the H.A.M.B. And like, if you actually showed some effort and you were trying to actually do something in the scene, man, that your audience, the community that you built, really embraced any kind of effort, any kind of authentic, real, well-meaning effort. That crowd really got behind it, right? Yeah.
I remember when I did the logo, you sent me like probably 10 of issue number 1. Yeah. And through the years, I have slowly eBayed those. I have 2 left, which I'll never sell. I made a fortune eBaying those issue ones, man.
Is that how you finance the H.A.M.B?
Yeah. Issue 1 of the Garage Journal, man. Or Garage Magazine.
I like that, the Garage Journal. I see a mashup coming, man.
Yeah, there you go.
So what happens now? I mean, the H.A.M.B has absolutely, and what you've done in the Jalopy Journal, I know there's been a lot of there's been a lot of legs from your original efforts. I know you've got other boards that you've done. There's other businesses that you've built around this. But what do you see as the future of this stuff? I mean, are we going to become the crotchety old men that we were railing against for so long, or are we
looks that way?
What are we going to do to reverse this shit, man?
I know we need to do something. I've never ran the Jalopy Journal of the H.A.M.B as a business, and I think that's why it's done well. I don't do it to make money, thank God. And because of that, I make decisions based more off of what I like to do and what makes me happy. And so that's given it longevity.
Yeah.
but it sacrifices planning for the future. Meaning, I have no idea where it's going to go because I don't know what I'm going to be into, 3 or 4 or 5, 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I feel like we are becoming the old crotchety farts, and I don't want to become that. And like tradition kills a lot of things. It causes corruption, kind of a lot of things in our world without getting specific.
Right.
And so in my mind, it's always this like delicate walk of, yeah, I'm focused on traditional cars, but I don't want to be caught up so much in tradition that I destroy something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a delicate balance that I don't think any of us have really had to face yet, but I think it's coming.
That makes a lot of sense, man, because tradition sometimes, especially when it comes to these cars, it kind of forces you to play by a playbook, right? That came before you, that was built before you, that existed before you. And in some ways I don't know, I guess part of our jobs is part of our lot in life is to keep that tradition going, right?
Yeah.
But if it's too rigorous, if it's too, or if it's not flexible enough, if it's too unflinching, well, then what? Right?
Yeah.
Does it just become a museum and we just die off and there it goes? And hey, well, I guess we did what we did. Or is there a way to actually embrace a younger audience? And this is one of the things we deal with Hemmings all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Interestingly, Hemmings and the Jalopy Journal are sort of on parallel roads. Both been around forever. Hemmings a lot longer, obviously.
Right.
But staying traditional, staying true to our roots, but at the same time, continuous improvement, not letting it be quenched. It's a weird place to be.
Dude, we talked to Jay Ward a couple of weeks ago, and creative director for the Cars franchise through Disney and Pixar, and he brings this up too. It's like, well, what do we do with we've got an entire couple generations now of people who could be car people or enthusiasts in some sort of way, but they don't know a world without the Fast and Furious franchise. They don't know a world without Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
Or what do we do? Can they come to this stuff and can they understand, or appreciate what we've done with these things, or is it just too? Is the barrier to entry just too high?
Yeah, and I think they absolutely can appreciate it if given the chance. It's just, again, that barrier to entry. But my bigger concern is, I think Toyota is the last car company to commit to electric cars, and they are saying they'll be fully electric by 2030.
Wow.
And so that's like, damn, where are we going to get gas?
Right. That's 9 years from now, right?
Yeah,
I mean, do we skip a year with the pandemic? Do we say it's 8 years from now?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that's true. And here's a thought. Like, what do you think of this? Like, is it okay that gasoline becomes an exotic fuel? Is it okay that gas turns into an $8 a gallon, rare experience? Is that all right? I mean, are we still, if that's true, will we pay the $8 a gallon, like we do for race gas now?
Yeah. People in Europe are paying that, and they're still doing traditional cars.
Right.
I think we'll do it. It's just making that barrier that much higher at this point,
Right. Right.
But
do you think there's going to be new cars that will, gloriously, rebel, or just at least a model of something that will remain gasoline powered? Like, will there be a Challenger that will always be gas powered? Or how? I mean, we see what's happening with the Mustang.
Yeah, who knows? The way it's going, it sure looks like it's going to be fully electric,
Yeah.
There's a guy here in town, a friend of mine named Mark Davis. He's also a hot rod guy, and he's taking early cars, like early Porsche 911s. They did like a Back to the Future DeLorean, cars like that, sticking electric motors in them, but keeping the stock transmission, so you're still shifting gears.
Okay.
And it's an interesting take because it still has that mechanical feel to it. You miss the sound, obviously, which is a huge part of it, but it's interesting because you're still driving the car,
Wow. Have you driven one of these?
Yeah, he brought by a Porsche, the 911 he did, and let me drive it. And it was really interesting. Instant torque with a clutch.
Yeah, how does that work? So when you're shifting, what are you shifting into? Another gear?
Yeah, it has the original transmission in it.
Wow.
So it has that 5-speed that came in that car, and it's just it feels like a Porsche 911 on mute with a whole lot of torque.
Wow. I've
Yeah.
always heard about the torque thing. I've never driven one.
It's
but
crazy.
wow. So do you think that's going to be a viable alternative or a viable version of this stuff, of collector cars?
A lot of guys are already doing it, and I definitely think that's probably the future of old cars on those conversions. And then it'll just be the crotchety old farts like me still doing gas stuff.
I mean, are gas pumps going to turn into like the old, like those old, those pumps that were behind the gas station?
Oh,
You
yeah.
go and fill up, right? Like it's like,
Yeah. Or like telephone booths.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Is that what's going to turn into? Or are we going to have to buy gasoline in like 5-gallon drums and just bring it home with a big,
Right.
for off-road use only stickers on the side of it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm down. I mean, I'll still do it.
Yeah. Whatever you got to do, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So your kids, are they into this stuff? Are they going to get
Not at all.
No,
No.
really?
My son is not really into cars that much at all. When he was younger, he's very much into Lamborghinis. I don't know why.
Well,
But I'd like have to take him to dealerships to look at Lamborghinis and Ferraris. And my oldest daughter, who's 15, is just now getting into cars, and because she's got her permit and she's going to get her license next year. And she's got a pretty good, I've noticed her tastes are pretty good, even in modern stuff. She tends
Really?
to float towards the pretty cool stuff, but she appreciates the old cars. I haven't let her drive one yet because embarrassingly haven't taught her how to drive a standard. But that's coming this summer, and
you got time.
And we'll get her in an old car. Yeah.
How about motorcycles? What's your opinion on that stuff? I mean, sometimes I think like motorcycles are sort of like the gateway to some of this stuff because
Absolutely. Yeah.
right.
I actually paid my way through college working at a Harley shop.
No kidding.
And that's how I met Jesse James.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's how our paths crossed. But through that experience, I also had for a while, I had a motorcycle forum.
Oh.
One thing I learned I ran that forum for 6 or 7 years, then I sold it because I realized I'm not passionate about that, and it shows. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a straight up poser. I can build one. I just do not enjoy riding them at all. It makes my butt hurt. I don't like the wind in my ears. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't my thing. And It was like, oddly, you could tell by the way I ran
so
the website.
Weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So weird. Can't imagine.
Yeah, so I sold that one. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, one of my moderators on the H.A.M., also a very good friend of mine, Kevin Lee, he's gone to building more motorcycles now just because it's smaller, it takes him less time and cheaper. And I mean, he's gotten a pretty good name for himself now building bikes, and his stuff I love looking at it, but I have no interest in riding it.
Yeah, because I see like, it's easy to understand how, especially if you're living in a suburban or even urban area, a bike, just the size alone and the accessibility, like they're easy to actually store. Plus, like everything's accessible, everything's exposed. You can work on one fairly easily and break stuff and fix it and replace it, right?
Yeah, it's like, because when we were first doing this, I remember a lot of guys were one, skaters as kids, and two, went from skating to Volkswagen Beetles.
Yep.
And those Beetles made the jump to hot rods. And I think a lot of that now is like, at least mechanically inclined kids are building motorcycles and moving on to something else.
Well, I was talking to Max Schaff, who is probably one of the early, I guess, names in like the custom motorcycle scene, the custom chopper scene, especially when it comes to like the V-twin scene. And he's actually an ex-pro skater. He's a former pro skater. And one of the things he'd said, a couple years ago that's really stuck with me. He said, motorcycles are the retirement plan for for old skaters.
Yeah.
For old pro skaters. And it makes a lot of sense. It seems, I've watched Jason Jesse, another old pro skater, ride, and it seems like there's a lot of easy transition from the things you have to learn how to do as a skater into motorcycles. One of the things like bailing gracefully, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Being able to roll with it, right?
One of the absolute highlights of my life is like 15 years ago or so, Steve Caballero became a H.A.M. member, and it was oh my, like I'm not a
Caballero.
starstruck guy, but Steve Caballero, I freaked out. And then he started coming to our car shows. I couldn't talk to him.
Oh,
Like I
bet-
literally could not talk. Animal
awesome.
chin, man.
Animal and he had a Model A, right? He had
Yeah,
a chopped
yeah,
Model A. It
yeah,
was green with gold scallops. He had a chopped
yeah,
Model A with a small block in it.
yeah. He's into
Yeah.
bikes now. He does dirt bikes.
Yeah, dirt. He's really into dirt bikes
Yeah, he
now.
like broke his leg something like last year.
Yeah,
Really bad
yeah,
break.
yeah. I don't see him in any hot rod or anything like that. I see him in his leathers.
Yeah,
You know, he's all foxed out. He's all JT'd out, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's why I see him now.
yeah. He's
I
such
just,
a nice guy.
dude, I saw a post with him, and this is what blew my mind. I saw a post with him, and it was a bunch of old BMX guys as well, and old freestyle guys too.
Yeah,
It's like, oh man, that's a perfect collision, you know, of cultures right there. And of course, they were in their motorcycle gear.
yeah,
You know, that's
yeah,
perfect.
absolutely.
Perfect.
The first year that Keith Tardell and I did the Revolution in Northern California, Jay Adams showed up.
Did he
And
really?
yeah, that was
Jay
another
Adams,
like,
the old pro skater.
yes, it was like, oh my, that can't be. And it was.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that, okay, for people listening, so the revolution, the hot rod was it the hot rod revolution?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was a show that was a car show that you and Keith Tardell, who is an amazing, he owns a hot rod shop in Austin now called, and you guys are best friends. You guys are thick as thieves. He has a shop called Rex Rods.
I mean, he's my brother. My kids call
Yeah.
him Uncle Keith. His kids call me Uncle Ryan. We're family. Yeah.
That's amazing. And he builds some of he's one of, I would say, top 5 people in my head who have the best taste in cars. Yeah. Like he is beyond reproach.
Very, very good taste, and probably the best flathead Ford builder in the world.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
You
And he
can't
comes
get
from hot rod royalty. Like his dad,
Yeah.
Vern Tardell, you know, I helped him start his website years ago, and I wasn't doing anything more than just promotion. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, Hot Rod Magazine did an article about Vern and posted my cell phone number. Or it might have been Rodney
Vern's facts.
Yeah, instead of Vern's facts. And to this day, I kid you not, about 6 times a year, about once every other month, I still get a phone call about asking about flathead parts. And the person who calls just starts in like, so I'm looking for a 59 AB. I'm like, wait a minute. Are you calling about Vern Tardell? You know, and that was 20 years ago, you know. But yeah, that just shows the power of that stuff. And yeah, Keith is just amazing. And that show that you guys put on was well curated. I hate to use the C word, but it was well curated. And that was a show that was small, but so well done, because you were very particular about the kind of cars that you were going to allow on the grass. And it showed, and it was well worth it, because that was another labor of love.
That show was killer. You know, we did it in Austin a few times as well, and we're not done doing them. We'll do it again once we find a venue.
Good.
But to think, like, we moved it to Austin, and we did it at the power plant downtown in Austin, which now is like fancy condos, but at the time was just a power plant out of commission.
Wow.
And it was the most beautiful car show I've ever seen. Like, I know I'm biased, but I've heard other people say it's literally the best car show ever. I mean, it was incredible.
The backdrop, I've never been to that one, but the backdrop, I've seen photos. It was this, now correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was probably built, that power plant was built in the 30s maybe, so it was an Art Deco.
Yeah, very Art Deco.
Like an Art Deco design, right? And that was the backdrop for your show.
Yeah, and it was abandoned. And I mean, as part of the show, you can go walk through the power plant and see it, and hopefully not fall into the cooling plants. I mean, it was gorgeous. It was overcast and super quiet. And I think we had 85 cars, and the photography from that show was just insane. And then the power plant got bought and turned into condos. So we moved it to a military base here in Austin, and we did it there 3 or 4 times. And then we're like, okay, we've had our fill of that. We want to find another venue that's as impactful as Pen Grove in Northern California or the power plant. Because Pen Grove was cool too. It was just that little league baseball field.
Yeah, that's all it was.
It was beautiful.
Beautiful. Well, that's the power. It's the power of that kind of taste, I think, in cars, when you can put something together like that and show the best of the best, and just the ultimate in just creativity, but yet sticking to tradition, you know, because there's beauty in that as well. It does seem like there's still an audience for that. And I think that, I don't know what it's going to take to actually, maybe it just takes us as now the resident old guys maybe we have to take some of our own advice, me in particular, and just say to ourselves, look, we've got to take a couple steps toward that crowd instead of waiting for them to come to us. Maybe
Yeah.
that's part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. And a lot of it too, it's like I don't have the energy I had when I was younger to
Right.
do 5 shows a year or whatever I
Yeah.
was doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, there's plenty of guys my age that do, but at least me, I don't much care for car shows. 2, I don't have the same energy that I used to,
Yep.
and I'll go through spurts while I get it. I've just got to hold on to it better.
Are we living the Gen X meme where it says like, look, we're Gen X, we just want to sit down and watch TV? Is that kind of what it is now?
My thing is like what I really do old cars for is that brief moment when you're by yourself in your car on an old country road and there's nobody around.
Yeah.
Which is, I love that moment, but it doesn't help me, you know, run a website. It doesn't help me promote a car show, because I live for that brief moments all by myself. Like it's not a group activity to me. And you hear people say, yeah, the cars are great, but it's the people. Not with me, dude. It's the cars.
It's the cars, right?
Yeah,
Right.
it's the cars. And that sounds terrible, but it's honest. Like I do it for the cars, and I've met a lot of great people, but that's not why I did it. That's not why I do it. It's the cars.
It's the car, which is interesting because what you've done, what you've single-handedly done is create the community around the cars. And that's you. You did that. Sorry. I'm sorry, man.
I don't think I get credit for that all the time, but I honestly don't think it was me. I was just in the right or wrong place at the right or wrong time. And I work my ass off. I'm good at working. I'm not good with people. It's just, pure luck, pure luck. I honestly don't think it was anything I did other than work hard. Like there's no smarts on my part that got that done.
Well, if nothing, at the very least, and I would probably argue with those points you just made, but at the very least, you were certainly there at the right time.
Yeah.
You know, like what you did. I would say that, you know, it's probably no luck at all. Is probably like, because I know how much hard work you put into this, and because luck would just mean like, well, if something just happened to you. I know how much work you put into this and making this what it is, and I think it's a true testament to what you did with the Jalopy Journal and the H.A.M. that people just sort of take it for granted sometimes. Like this, look, the H.A.M.'s always going to be there. It always has been for me. It's, you know, this is where I go to get my fix. This is where I talk to my tribe. This is where I go for my parts and this is where I go to learn. I need to learn a new trick, or I need to learn an old trick. Here's where I do it. You know, that was all you, and there wasn't anything there before you.
Yeah, I provided a place for people to give that information.
Yeah, which is amazing.
But again, because I don't do it as a business, it'll always be there as far as I'm well, at least until I'm dead.
One last thing I wanted to ask you before we sign off. There is one particular thread on the H.A.M. I think it's called Drag Cars in Motion.
Yeah.
That is a juggernaut all its own. It's one thread on this message board that's been around this thread has been around for years. And, you know, if you look at message boards or participate in message boards, you will see like some messages and some threads, it'll have like 5, 10, 20 pages of comments, etc. And then maybe through the archive, you look back and you find it again. The Drag Cars in Motion thread, how many pages and how many comments is that one singular thread up to now?
I don't know. I think it might be, is it 20,000 comments or 20,000 pages?
I think it's 20,000 pages.
Yeah, I think it is. There's also part 1 and a part 2, because at one point it got so long that it was shutting my server down. So the one that's running now is part 2.
Part 2. It's got that big. I don't know. Now I'm no expert, but I gotta believe in the history of message boards, that's got to be up there as far as performance.
Yeah, I think actually that thread is in the top 50 thread, or so vBulletin, which is the old software you used, and Xenfora, which is the new software they all have records, right? For largest message boards, most members, et cetera, et cetera. And that thread is on both the vBulletin and the Xenfora record books in the top 10, I think.
I believe it.
Yeah,
that's insane. That is insane, and just again a true testament. So if you guys, anyone listening to this, if you're not on the Jalopy Journal or the H.A.M. yet, check it out, jalopyjournal.com. You'll find the ham on there and just dig into that. Just sign up. It's all free to join. Ryan is militantly observant about keeping it free and to keeping the nonsense away. And he has done a great job of that. And you will be rewarded for every minute you spend on that. Dude, I can't thank you enough for coming on board, man. This has been
thanks
great.
for having me, man. It was awesome seeing you again. I don't think
Yeah,
I've
you
seen
too,
with
dude.
my own eyes for a long time.
Been too long, man. And after the Rona, I've just aged.
Yeah, right.
I'm just an old man on the mountain now.
Right.
All right, man. Ryan, we will see you in person soon, I hope.
All right, brother.
All right, brother.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.